أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. In the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful, we ask Allah to send His greatest peace and blessings upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We praise Allah for all the blessings He has given us, and the greatest blessing being that He allowed us to be of the ones who remain steadfast, dedicated, and loyal on the path of our Master after the Prophet, the commander of the faithful, the prince of the believers, the protector of the Prophet and his message, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. We praise Allah for this blessing and every blessing, for without Allah, we would have nothing. Assalamu alaikum, my dear respected brothers and sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we're continuing our conversations, our discussions on the vision of a virtuous community. And we've covered much so far from divine guidance and understanding how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through His justice has given us the messengers, the prophets, and the imams, how He has spoken to us through His word and through the individuals that are implementing His message. And inshallah, we're going to be continuing in these conversations, in these discussions, to understand this relationship that we have with the Imam of our time, with the last viceroy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth, being Al-Imam al-Hujjat al-Mahdi al-Muntadhar, Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Askari. This individual, alayhi salam, what is our relationship with him? In order for us to understand and have a better relationship with him, it would be pertinent for us to get a better understanding of how did things develop at his time. As in, what was the situation that he was born in? What was the transition between him and his father, Imam Hassan al-Askari? What was the conditions that they were living in during the Abbasid regime? Furthermore, when we hear of the idea of occultation, when the Imam entered this period of an occultation, there was a period of time before what we know today as the major occultation or the era of occultation that we're living in, and that was the minor occultation. How long did the minor occultation go for? Were there representatives or deputies of the Imam during this period of time, and how many were there? And then further, when it comes to the last deputy that had existed, what happened after that deputy, and who did people go to after the last representative or the last ambassador of the Imam passed away? As we know that our Imam alayhi salam was born about 1,000 years ago. When we're looking at his existence and his presence with us, though it's not something that is completely peculiar, as we have seen in history, individuals like our Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, who lived over 950 years, and other individuals such as Isa alayhi salam, our Prophet Jesus, who he himself would be an individual where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not allow him to be taken or be killed by people, and would elevate him to the heavens and protect the Prophet alayhi salam. But the better understanding that we get when we learn of the details of the experiences of the Imams and try to make sure that we're getting ourselves closer to him through learning his story, I recommend in this journey for us, as we're trying to learn the stories of the Imams, learn the stories of the Prophets themselves, I recommended, I believe it was in the first lecture, a book called God's Emissaries by Sheikh Rizwan Arustu. That's an excellent book as a reference to understand and learn more in depth of the lives of the Prophets. And another book that I would recommend is The Progeny by Sayyid Ali al-Hakim. It's a book that goes into a highlight-based approach to the lives of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And though they're not pure biographies, what they do is they're looking at certain principles and values that made up who they were as individuals or were highlighted in their lives. It's a very beneficial read, And I encourage you throughout these lectures and throughout these talks, try to supplement them with additional research, supplement them with additional readings. And as we continue along, I may have more recommendations as we go, inshallah. Let's jump right into it. When it came to the situation that Imam al-Mahdi Ajjallahu ta'ala farajah was living in, the situation and the circumstances of the time were extremely dire. Historically, when we look at the challenges that the Imams faced, they faced a number of dynasties. You had the Umayyad dynasty that would come through Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan and with Yazid and then their descendants. That would last for about 90 years. The Abbasid dynasty that would come at the lifetime of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam, or sixth Imam, would be one that would last for hundreds of years after that. And for the most part, that was the dynasty that the Imams lived through. The Abbasid dynasty initially would come out as one that was taking vengeance against the Umayyads in the honor and the name of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. They themselves claiming to be from the Ahlul Bayt or relatives of the Holy Prophet ﷺ through the relationship through their forefather Al-Abbas, the Prophet's uncle. Now, when we're looking at the dynasty, you would be looking at a number of rulers that existed. For example, during the life of Imam Rida alayhi salam, the challenges that he faced with the Abbasid ruler of his time was different than Imam al-Askari. And throughout these periods of time, when you had these rulers being busied with troubles or challenges or conquests, whether they were external affairs that they were dealing with in their empire, or they were dealing with internal issues and strife that they faced from civic society, that would affect and impact the relationship that the Imams had with their followers. In a way that the more tension that came from the ruling authorities, the less ability that the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam had to go and move and flow with the Imams. Where at certain times that the Imams even practiced taqiyya with their followers, where their followers would come to them, and in order to protect them from the authorities who had sent spies and people throughout the empire to observe the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam and to keep an eye on them, so that no kind of political movement was being made at the time. They would guard their followers by at certain times making sure that they gave them instructions that may not necessarily reflect the belief of the Imams. And by that, what we're essentially talking about is the Imams throughout the time, their top priority was guarding the faith and guarding the believers. So depending on how stringent the ruling authorities were and the danger that was placed on their lives and the lives of their followers, they were very cognizant of the situation with the ruling authorities. So at times, instructions would be made to protect their followers so that those spies of the authorities would not pay them too much more attention, saying that, you know what, this person isn't necessarily a follower of the Ahlul Bayt. In fact, he's just of the masses, he's someone, just one of the majority of people. We don't have to pay him much attention. Because there were people that were following Ahlul Bayt at that time secretly, because people were being persecuted. During the Umayyad dynasty, followers of Ahlul Bayt were being persecuted openly. Most of the time during the Abbasid dynasty, the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam were being persecuted in secret. Now, when we come to the time of Imam al-Askari alayhi salam, and as with his forefathers, throughout the lives of the Imams, their lives were threatened because they were looked at as a threat by the rulers. Whether it was during the time of Imam Rida alayhi salam, where the Abbasid Caliph of his time actually wanted to prop up his own establishment and his own administration by having the Imam named as his heir apparent and having him as his designated successor, even though the Imam didn't want that position, to secure the well-being and the safety of his followers and the Muslims in general. He would presume that role. But lo and behold, not too long after that, the Imam would be ordered to be poisoned and killed. And that was the condition that most of the Imams actually faced, was they all died by poison. And that poison was administered by the ruling authorities of the time. For what reason? They didn't want people to grow in number and following these individuals who Muslims just naturally gravitated towards them, not even necessarily by them preaching their word or them calling to people to follow them. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam himself being one to say, "Kunu du'atan lana bi ghayri alsinatikum," be a call unto us without your tongues. And that's something that the Imams practiced and they preached, where when they engaged with people, it was simply their conduct. It was simply their ability to relate to people, to treat people with fairness and kindness, be an extension of that mercy of our Holy Prophet Muhammad as that mercy to mankind. So people gravitated towards them and people wanted to be close to them. At every one of these ruling authorities, though again, they faced their own troubles, they faced their own issues, and were challenged throughout their administrations, there was a returning theme that they kept on having to address, which was, how do we look at the followers of Ahlul Bayt, the followers of the Prophet, the followers of the family of the Prophet, and their Imams. Their Imams, for the Abbasids, being technically their relatives and their cousins, and this ongoing discussion that they would have in many of these standoffs between the Imams and them, these standoffs that were initiated by the Abbasid rulers themselves, whether it was in times to prop themselves up or to address certain things that were concerns within their own court, they would face off with the Imams, and one thing would lead to another, especially when it came to the later Imams, where they acted more quickly and had them disposed of and killed by administration of poison. Imam al-Askari alayhi salam, during his lifetime, there was talks of him being the 11th Imam, and counting the Imams and looking at the narrations of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he would say that there were 12 princes after me, these are my caliphs, awwalahum Ali wa akhiruhum Muhammad ibni, my son or my great-grandson Muhammad. People were waiting to see the last Imam of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. So the Abbasid rulers during the lifetime of Imam al-Askari, they were taking a close watch of his house, of his home, of his family, the people that were coming and going out of his house. And in fact, for the last years of his life, he was placed under house arrest. That house arrest was one where the authorities would constantly be patrolling around the house. They moved him to Samarra, where he was living there. The house was a small one, not many people could go and come. And miraculously, our Imam al-Mahdi, Imam al-Askari's son, would be born in that home, but the pregnancy of his mother would be concealed. And no one would know of the birth of the Imam except a few people that were considered to be the confidants of the Imam, a few family members that were very close to the family and kept that secret. In fact, that secret would continue to be kept until Imam al-Askari alayhi salam was killed. And when he was killed and when he was poisoned, Imam al-Mahdi ajalallahu ta'ala farajhu al-Sharif was 6 years old. Now, at that time, the Imam, like we said, when he was born, it was a secret that was kept by the family and by the individuals that were closest to the Imam. Some family members actually didn't even know that the Imam was born. For example, when Imam al-Askari alayhi salam was killed and he was poisoned, and his funeral took place, at his funeral, his brother would come forward, and he would be known as, later become to be known as Ja'far al-Kadhab, Ja'far the liar. And why? Was because he came at the funeral of the Imam and he proclaimed that he was the next Imam. Imam al-Mahdi, peace and blessing to be upon him, this young 6-year-old boy would come to the forefront of the funeral and with his hand gesture to his uncle to move to the side and pray over his father. And this was a symbolic gesture that was done and is still done to this day, even with some of our grand scholars, where the person who is praying over the Imam is not prayed over except by another Imam. So Ja'far al-Kadhab, Imam Mahdi's uncle, who came forward and wanted to pray over the Imam and assumed this role of, now I'm the leader of the people, now I'm the leader of the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, that would not happen, because Imam al-Mahdi, even though he was a young boy, he would assume this role, and even though many people didn't even know that he actually existed. So Imam al-Mahdi would enter into the minor occultation immediately after this time. He would show himself to the people, make it evident, make it apparent. And though this was at the bewilderment of the Abbasid authorities, where they didn't even know that he existed, and they thought what they were able to do was to contain the Imam and not allow for his progeny to continue, keeping him under house arrest, monitoring the house, not allowing anybody to be able to come in and out, and then eventually having him poisoned and killed. They thought it just ended there. But again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will was manifested, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his saying that the princes after him and the khulafa after him, the people that are going to carry on this guardianship of the faith and the faithful, they're 12, and the last of them is Muhammad al-Mahdi. He would be born, he would be 6 years old as his assumption of the active leadership or active imamate would take place. And he would enter the minor occultation. For what reason? When we're looking at the occultation, the primary concept here of the occultation being that it is protecting the guardian or the viceroy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that's placed on earth. We're going to be talking about this in more detail, inshallah, as the nights continue, as some of the nights that are dedicated in our presentations are dedicated specifically to understanding the system of occultation, the different forms of occultation, and the different individuals that actually experience occultation historically. Just as a sneak peek of that, Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam experienced an occultation. Prophet Moses alayhi salam experienced an occultation. Prophet Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, experienced an occultation. The tradition of occultation was one that was a mechanism by divine guidance, established for humanity, established for these viceroys of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth to protect them when the circumstances of their time were ones where people were using their free will to fight against the representatives of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So take the example of Imam al-Mahdi, and at his time, where he was the last designated disciple of our Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the disciples of the Prophet being 12, he is the 12th. He had to be protected. He had to be preserved. Similar to the situation with Imam Ali Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, where our Imam Husein on the day of Ashura, one of the heart-wrenching experiences that's had is seeing the scene where Imam Zayn al-Abidin would come out from his tent and want to fight alongside his father, who had been left with no one, no companion, no son, no brother. Al-Abbas is gone, Ali al-Akbar is gone, Al-Qasim is gone, all of the companions are gone, fallen, slain on the lands of Karbala. And Imam Zain al-Abidin, this sick, ill, frail young man, is dragging his sword on the sand, walking with a cane, trying to come forward and protect his father. Imam Hussein alayhi salam would see this, call onto his sister Lady Zainab and tell her, "Oh Zainab, protect Zain al-Abidin, take him back into the tent. If he is to enter the battlefield and be killed, then there will be no proof of Allah left on the face of this earth. And the hujjah of Allah must remain." The proof of God out of His justice and out of the system that God has established for us is one that it will continue to remain until the end of time, until the day of judgment. And our holy Imam, our 12th Imam, is that last viceroy, is that last disciple of the Prophet that assumes this role of manifesting God's justice as his proof upon the creation. So this Imam, at the age of 6 years old, his father was killed and the active imamate became in his domain. So the Imam alayhi salam in this position would enter into the minor occultation for the reason of protecting and preserving himself, because of the authorities and the circumstances of the time wanted him killed at whatever cost. This was something that was observed and actually prepared for by the previous Imams. So Al-Imam Al-Askari, Al-Imam Al-Hadi, and Al-Imam Al-Jawad, their role when you're looking at the movement of the Imams experienced eras of preparing the believers in different ways. For example, with Imam Ali, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, Al-Imam Al-Hassan, Al-Imam Al-Husein, what they did was they formed a role of providing the foundations and protecting the foundations of the belief in our Holy Prophet Muhammad, in Islam, protecting the body of Islam, and giving the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam a very solid foundation in what it meant to be part of that wilayah, to be part of that allegiance, to associate with Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam and know Ali ibn Abi Talib, Amir al-Mu'mineen, not just as the individual, but as the thought, as al-haq, and being that truth that is differentiated from everything else. And that emphasis of that connection through him, as in that service to the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and ultimately submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That was his will. Al-Imam Ali, Al-Imam Al-Hassan, Al-Imam Al-Husayn, they created that foundation for the followers of Ahlul Bayt. From Al-Imam Zain al-Abidin unto Al-Imam Al-Baqir, unto Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, and Imam Al-Kadhim, and somewhat to an extent to Imam al-Rida, who he himself would be in a transitory phase, onto the later Imams. They would create a foundation for the jurisprudential identity of the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, and clarifying what were the rules, the laws, and the practices that were established for the followers of Ahlul Bayt. And then after that came this preparation from a social aspect, and how to live and survive during a time where, from even the time of Imam al-Kadhim forward, that how to survive a time where the authorities limited that engagement with the Imams to a certain extent, where the Imams were imprisoned or they were moved away from the people. They were moved from place to place, from Medina to Kufa, from Kufa to Persia, from Persia back to Samarra, and other places throughout the empire. If we look at the movement of the Imams, it's essential to, again, see them like we established a few nights ago, looking at them horizontally, that they were part of the same project, the same mission, the same vision, and the same strategy. And depending on the circumstances of the time, they had to adapt and focus on certain aspects with their followers. Like we mentioned yesterday with Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, the aspect of spirituality and spiritual rejuvenation taught through his psalms, his supplications, was a huge part of his legacy as an individual, as an imam, because of the spiritual death that was experienced by the people of the ummah after the tragedy, after the massacre of Karbala. Now, with our imam, he entered this minor occultation. And through this minor occultation, which we asked in the very beginning, how long did it last? And what was the relationship had between the Imam and his followers when they couldn't reach him? This occultation being not that the Imam was taken and placed in a place where he was not on earth, for example, like the occultation of Prophet Isa alayhi salam, but with his occultation, his identity was concealed from people. So people could reach him, but it was only those that were the closest to him that could actually reach him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concealed him from people in order that he may be protected. So for 60 years, the Imam alayhi salam communicated to his followers through designated deputies or ambassadors. And these ambassadors, representatives of the Imam who had this direct relationship with the Imam, were four individuals who were companions of his father, Imam al-Askari. Some of these companions, like the first, Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Asadi, was already considered to be a deputy or representative of the Imam. Note here, when we're looking at these relationships, the deputies of the Imam, again, the Imams before them had already began emphasizing the relationships that they had with their companions that they trusted in their abilities, both in knowledge and trustworthiness and piety, etc., as being representatives of the faith, as being representatives of the Imams themselves to their followers. And Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam would praise and even at their death would cry over individuals like Zurara for being such a beautiful personality, and describing people like Zurara and Muhammad ibn Muslim as being the nearest and dearest people to him, both of those that were alive and that were dead. All the way from these Imams, there was this emphasis on these individuals that were scholars in their own right, companions of the Imam, trusted individuals who, even during the lifetime of Imam al-Baqir, Imam Sadiq, when people would come to them, they would ask them certain jurisprudential questions, for example, and the Imams would turn to their companions and tell these individuals that are asking, why didn't you go and ask my companion so-and-so when you had this question? As indicating to them that, listen, I'm entrusting in them in this capacity that they have as being my representative, as being one who can give you the religious laws because they represent me. So our Imam al-Mahdi, this idea of deputyship was not a new one. It was something that was prepared for in the vision of the Imams, knowing that this time of occultation would come, knowing that the last disciple of our Holy Prophet Muhammad, being our Imam al-Mahdi, would enter in this period of time where, to protect him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would conceal his identity and only a few would be able to reach him. So these four deputies would come into play and be the ones who would represent the Imam with his followers. So when it came to the religious questions, the religious duties, paying their khums, seeking any kind of guidance when it came to their lives, they would go through these companions of Imam al-Askari, who would be the deputies of the Imam. And again, he would be at the age of 6 when the minor occultation would begin. And this minor occultation would last for over 60 years. The first deputy of the Imam being Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Asadi, he would be a deputy in his role until he would pass for about 7 years. Then his son, Abu Ja'far Muhammad ibn Uthman, would be the deputy for about 37 years. And he played a very consequential role for the length of time that he had in being the deputy of the Imam. After he would pass in 917 AD, Abu al-Qasim Huseini ibn Ruh would be the next deputy for the Imam, and he would be the deputy for about 20 years. Then finally, Abu al-Hasan Ali ibn Muhammad, he would be the last deputy and it would only last for about 3 years. In his role, though it was a short period of time, he would play the same role as the previous deputies. After the coming of his death, right before it, the Imam would let his followers know through the deputy himself that the door of deputyship, direct representation of the Imam, would close when the fourth deputy would pass away. Now, when the fourth deputy passed away, it wasn't that the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam had no way of implementing their faith and staying connected to the Imams. However, the direct representation of the Imam, where he is designating himself publicly to the people and telling people, this is my deputy, that ended. That door was closed. But after that, the Imam made it clear to his followers, how do you stay connected with me? How do you stay safeguarding your faith and understanding and knowing your responsibility before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and making sure that you're staying on our path? Again, this connection to Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam does not cease when the Imam is in occultation. And to the contrary, it should be strengthened in the sense that we're longing for him more and we're not taking for granted his presence. Though we can't see him, though he's concealed from us, he is still like the sun behind the clouds. We're still benefiting from his warmth, from his rays. We're still getting that. Now, the Imam advised when it came to who would the people go after, who do they go to after the last deputy passed away? The Imam himself would advise. He would say, وَأَمَّا الْحَوَادِثُ الْوَاقِعَةُ فَارْجِعُوا فِيهَا إِلَى رُوَاةِ حَدِيثِنَا فَإِنَّهُمْ حُجَّتِي عَلَيْكُمْ وَأَنَا حُجَّةُ اللَّهِ. And as for the current affairs, go back to the narrators of our traditions. They are my proof on you, and I am the proof of God. Now, this is a famously narrated hadith, one that is notably used in understanding the whole idea of representation of the Imam, even in an indirect way when it comes to the system of taqleed, the system of following or emulating scholars, where the Imam himself is giving us this guidance, saying, when it comes to the new matters that you're facing, the new issues, of course, certain things are clear cut when it comes to some of our obligations, but definitely there's certain things that come up on a normal basis in our lives, new challenges that we face. And the individuals that fill this role, according to the Imam, he's giving us clear direction, is listen, the narrators of our traditions. The narrators of our traditions are essentially the scholars. And the scholars, not just merely anybody who is studying or one who is on a scholarly path, but those are the individuals that are considered to be experts in the narration, experts in the jurisprudence, in the Islamic law, in understanding our furu' ad-din and what our obligations and practices and worship are, and worship and transaction. So this, by the way, is essential for us to understand when it comes to the system of marja'iyya, the system of taqleed, the system of the Hawza, the Islamic seminary, these institutions that were built, again, the foregrounds of them and the infrastructure of them were established from the times of the Imam. So for example, and inshallah we're going to be discussing this in more detail in the coming nights, when it came to the institution of the Hawza itself, the Islamic seminary is not one that is a new institution. In actuality, it was one that was established way back at the time of Imam al-Baqir and Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq having had 4,000 plus students in Kufa alone in the seminary that he established. When we look at the tradition of the Imams and seeing they from the very beginning established for us what we need to do and where we need to go to in order for us to preserve our faith. For what reason? Why were they working on this so early on? Again, for them manifesting the role as the Imams, the ones implementing the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, educating people, safeguarding their faith, leading them, setting the example, giving them the practical implementation of how to reach their potential as followers of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and ultimately servants of Allah Azza wa Jal. The Imam didn't leave us alone. the Imam didn't leave us astray. The Imam made sure that he would have the system established from his forefathers and would continue on. And that is why it's so important for us to connect to the Imam and make sure that we understand the struggles that they faced and what they sacrificed in order for us to preserve our faith. And then acknowledge the sacrifices of all of the individuals throughout history, from our early scholars to our contemporary scholars, the lifestyle that they have committed to in safeguarding the heritage of Ahlul Bayt and making it a living practice for us to make sure that we understand what our obligations to God are. Now, of course, some things, like we said, are clear, but some of them are not. It is those scholars that have committed themselves to becoming the ruwati hadithina, the narrators of our traditions, the ones that are experts in their field and have committed themselves to a lifelong journey of learning so that they can translate to us what our obligations are when we don't have that direct access to the Imam. Putting this all together, brothers and sisters, we've addressed, one, when it comes to the relationship that we have with the Imam, understanding historically the situation that his father and his grandfathers faced in the challenges that they faced with the Abbasid dynasty, with the ruling authorities, and the sacrifices that they made were they even had to conceal the birth of the Imam, and his existence was not even known except by a few until the death of his father, Imam al-Askari alayhi salam. We described that situation and the home of the Imam in which he was born, in that sardab, in that basement, where he was able to be protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will, and then he would even enter his minor occultation through that same house at the age of 6. We've addressed that his deputies were 4 individuals, and these 4 individuals continued on in that role of deputyship for about 60 years. We addressed that when it came to the final deputy and what would happen after him, that the Imam would give clear instruction to his followers on who to follow and who to go back to. Inshallah, in the coming nights, we're going to go into a little bit more of detail and background into the institutions that would make up this in the modern day, the scholars that would follow, and it came to the institutions of the Hawza, the Islamic Seminary, the Marji'iyya and Taqleed, the importance of the autonomy and independence of these institutions from the governments of their time and from other affiliations and organizations, and the sacrifices that were made in order to protect the integrity of this wilaya, the allegiance to Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, and ultimately the body of Islam and protecting that religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We end with this. وهذا والحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة والتسليم على نبينا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.